Hey, what is going on, everybody? Welcome into this week's edition of my top starts and sits for week 13 of the NFL season. You guys should know the drill by now, but just in case we have any first time listeners, you're going to get my top two starts at quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and the tight end position. I'm going to go ahead and dive right into this video, starting at the quarterback position, as I always do. And my top start of the week, I'm going to go with Tua Tagovailoa against the Commanders. The Commanders are giving up 21.7 points per game to the quarterback position. That is the most allowed in the NFL. And then when you look at their last four games, they have allowed two different quarterbacks to throw over 300 yards. And what you really like about this is they have given up 10 passing touchdowns over their last four games. So they're averaging over 2 passing touchdowns a game, and they've only picked off the quarterback once. So I definitely love that Tua is going to connect with Tyreek and Jalen quite often on Sunday. So if you have him on your rosters, definitely make sure he's in your lineup. My other top start, I'm going to go with Brock Purdy against the Eagles. The Eagles are giving up 21.1 points per game. Two quarterbacks this year. That is the second most allowed in the NFL. And just like the Commanders, the Eagles defense has given up a lot of yards and a lot of touchdowns over these last four games. Philadelphia's defense, over their last four games, they have also allowed two different quarterbacks to throw over 300 yards. And they have actually allowed 11 passing touchdowns in their last four games. They do have 3 interceptions, but that's when touchdown to interception ratio. That's a very great rate for you, and I definitely like Brock Purdy, and definitely gonna speak on this more. But I like his wide receivers as well. Moving into my top two sits, both these players might be players you might be considering streaming at the quarterback position with 6 teams on a bye week. But if you were considering streaming one of these guys, I would definitely consider different options. My number one sit, I'm going with Matthew Stafford against the Browns. Quarterbacks are only scoring 11.8 points per game against the Browns defense this season. That's tied for the second fewest in the league. Then when you look at the last 4 games, only one quarterback has thrown over 200 passing yards against them, and they have only allowed 2 passing touchdowns in their last 4 games, and they have actually doubled the passing touchdowns and picked off a quarterback 4 times. So yeah, and you might be drawn to the name of Stafford, especially when you got like Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson on a bye, but I would definitely consider different options just because he doesn't have a great matchup. Another quarterback you might be considering streaming, and he does play tomorrow night, so if you were thinking about him and this sways you to go a different way, you might want to go see what else is out there for you to stream. But I would definitely consider avoiding Geno Smith against the Cowboys tomorrow night. Cowboys, they're only giving up 13.8 points per game to quarterbacks this season. That is the 4th fewest in the NFL. And then you look at their last 4 games, only one quarterback has thrown over 210 yards against their defense. Now they've given up 5 passing touchdowns, and they've picked off the quarterback 3 times. I do feel like if you end up streaming Geno, you're going to have to hope he gets at least a pair of touchdowns, because I don't believe he's going to get the yardage that you'd be seeking out of your quarterback in week 13. Moving into my top starts and sits at running back. My top starts of the week, I'm going to go with Najee Harris and Jalen Warren against the Cardinals. The Cardinals are they're tied for the second most allowed points per game to running backs this year. They're giving up 23.8 points per game. And then when you look at their last 4 games, they have allowed 3 different running backs to run over 95 rushing yards, and they have given up 6 running back touchdowns over the last 4 games. They've been a very good defense lately to get your running backs in. I definitely like this to be a matchup where both Najee Harris and Jalen Warren are going to see a lot of action, and they're going to have one of their ceiling performances of this fantasy football season. My other top start, he's a player that's playing tomorrow night. I am going to go with Tony Pollard against the Seattle Seahawks. I would even say for the daily lineups, when you put together your daily lineups in that Thursday night matchup, I would even consider Rico Daldo, it's Daldo, I think. I might have butchered his last name. I just really have been liking how that kid has been running the rock for the Cowboys this season. But yeah, Pollard draws a great matchup this week. Going against the Seahawks are giving up 20.6 points per game two running backs. That is the third most allowed. And then when you look at what they've allowed over their last 4 games, they have allowed two different running backs to run over 100 rushing yards, and they have actually given up 7 running back touchdowns in the last 4 weeks. So yeah, I love Pollard this week, and like I said, the backup Rico. If you put together those daily lineups, I think he'd be a very cheap option for you, where you can fill out your roster with other high caliber players when you put those together. My top sit of the week at running back, I am going to go with DeAndre Swift against the 49ers. 49ers are only giving up 12.2 points per game to running backs this year. That is the second fewest in the NFL. Then when we look at the last 4 games, only one running back finished over 50 rushing yards against them, and that was Joe Mixon, who finished with 87 yards. But remember, that was that game before the bye week. Obviously, Joe Burrow was in that game. So there have been running backs have been struggling to run the ball, especially now that they got Chase Young and that defensive front is back to playing how it was at the beginning of the season. Now, over the last 4 games, they've only given up 2 running back touchdowns. So I do feel like DeAndre Swift is going to be a touchdown-dependent play in fantasy football this week. My other top sit, I am going to go with Joe Mixon, a guy I just mentioned, against the Jaguars. Jaguars are actually only giving up 12.3 points per game to running backs this year. That is the third fewest in the league. And then when you look at their last 4 games, only one running back finished over 40 yards against the Jaguars, and that was Christian McCaffrey. He's an exception. And you got to keep in mind, one of those running backs that did not go over 40 yards was Derrick Henry. So they've been very good at shutting down opposing teams' rushing defenses for most of the season. And another thing, too, is they have not allowed a running back to score a touchdown in the last 4 games. So that's something else to factor in. So I would definitely consider benching Joe Mixon. Now, I know Swift and Mixon, they're high caliber names. There's 6 teams on a bye, so you may have to play those guys this week. I would just temper your expectations, but if you put together your daily lineups this weekend, those are going to be 2 names I would look to avoid. Moving into the wide receivers section, my top start of the week, I kind of hinted at it when I was talking about Brock Purdy, but I am going to go with Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk against the Eagles. To no surprise, if they're giving up a lot of points to the quarterback, they're usually giving up a lot of points to the wide receiver position, right? The Eagles are actually giving up 30 points a game to wide receivers in fantasy football this season. That's the most in the NFL. And then in their last 4 games, they have allowed 4 different wide receivers to finish over 95 receiving yards. And then they have also allowed 8 wide receiver touchdowns over their last 4 games. So giving up a tons of yards, averaging 2 wide receiver touchdowns a game. So I definitely expect Samuel and Ayuk to pop off in that big game on Sunday afternoon. Another start, this might be a guy where you can turn to him, especially when you got a week where 6 teams are on a bye. And I am going to go with Adam Thielen against the Bucs. The Bucs are giving up 26.1 points per game this season. That is the 4th most allowed in the NFL. And then when you look at the last 4 games, they have allowed 4 different wide receivers to finish over 100 receiving yards. So giving up a ton of yards through the air over the past month. And then they have allowed 5 wide receiver touchdowns over the last 4 games. This is more on the yardage, and there's just not a lot in the Panthers' passing attack. So I expect Thielen to see those type of targets that he was seeing for majority to the start of this season. Moving into my top sits, both of these are feeding off my top sits at quarterback. Now, I want to go ahead and say this. 6 teams are on a bye week. Obviously, like Cooper Kupp, it's hard to bench him. Same thing with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. I'm not going to dive into him too much right now, but that's for the next part. But yeah, so if you guys do play them in your seasonal leagues, I totally get it, but I would just temper your expectations. Like, I have a league where, just because of the bye weeks, I'm going to be playing Puka Nacua in a league, but I'm just tempering my expectations that he might not have a ceiling performance this week. So let's just go ahead and dive into this. Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua against the Browns. Wide receivers are only scoring 15.8 points per game against the Browns defense this year. That's the 3rd fewest in the league. Now, when you look at the last 4 games, the most yards they have allowed in the last 4 games to a wide receiver was 73 yards, and that was by Zay Flowers. And they've only given up 1 wide receiver touchdown in their last 4 games. So I do feel like Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua, they're going to be a touchdown dependent play. You would hope Cooper Kupp will get, if he's such in PPR leagues, at least get you a bunch of receptions. I don't know if he's going to be able to get the yards because wide receivers have been struggling to get yards against the Browns defense. I know, like I said, temper expectations in season leagues, but Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua, those are going to be names I'm looking to leave out of my daily lineups this weekend. And then speaking of that Thursday night matchup, when I talked about Geno Smith, I'd go with his wide receivers as well. DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and Jackson Smith-Njigba against the Cowboys. Cowboys are only giving up 17 points per game to wide receivers this year. That is the fourth fewest in the league. Now, only one wide receiver has finished over 75 receiving yards against the Cowboys in their last 4 games. That was Curtis Samuel this past Thanksgiving. This past Thanksgiving. And then the other wide receivers that are included that did not finish over 75 receiving yards against the Cowboys, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and Terry McLaurin in those last 4 weeks. And then they have only given up 3 wide receiver touchdowns. So the fact that now you got kind of this trio of wide receivers in Seattle that are kind of splitting the targets at this point of the season, and then you got a defense that's been really good against the pass over the last 4 weeks, and actually throughout the year. That's why if you happen to have a better option than a DK Metcalf or a Tyler Lockett, I would definitely consider it. But again, 6 teams are in a bye week. Like I said, I admit it to you guys. I'm playing Puka Nacua in the league. There's another league. I got to play Tyler Lockett this week because of all the buys I have on my bench. So I get it, during a bye week, you're going to probably have to play these guys. So I just temper your expectations that they're probably going to finish closer to their floor. But then when you put together your daily lineups, either tomorrow night or this weekend, these would be names I would look to avoid having in my lineups. Moving into the final section, the old lovely tight end position, my top start of the week. I'm going to go with Dalton Schultz against the Broncos. The Broncos are giving up 10.2 points per game to tight ends this year. That is the most allowed in the NFL. Over their last 4 games, they have allowed 4 straight games where a tight end has finished over 50 receiving yards against their defense. And they have also given up 3 tight end touchdowns over their last 4 games. This screams a ceiling performance out of Schultz. So if you have him on your roster, I'll definitely get him in your lineup and maybe check if you could stream him if he might be out there on the waivers. Another tight end I really like this week, I'm going to go with Evan Ingram against the Bengals defense. They're giving up 9.2 points per game to tight ends this year. That's the second most allowed in the league. Now, over their last 4 games, they've actually allowed 3 different tight ends to finish over 70 receiving yards. Now, they have not allowed a tight end to get a touchdown in their last 4 games, but one of those games was the game that Mark Andrews got hurt, so I kind of be like, I think I could see maybe Andrews would have scored a touchdown if he didn't get hurt in that early in that Thursday night matchup between the Bengals and the Ravens. So I definitely think Ingram's been like up and down. I feel like this is going to be an up performance for Ingram, so I would definitely get him in your lineups for Week 13. My other tops, and then moving into my top sits, my top sit of the week, I am going to go with Jake Ferguson against the Seahawks. So this is a matchup for tomorrow night. And when you look at the mainly on these data points, right, the Seahawks, they're only giving up 5.7 points per game. That's tied for the 9th fewest in the league allowed to a tight end. Now, over their last 4 games, only one tight end has finished over 45 receiving yards against them. And that was Mark Andrews, right? An exception to the rule. And then they have not allowed a tight end to score a touchdown in their last 4 games. I think that, like I mentioned, I think this is going to be a Tony Pollard, a Rico Dowdle type of game. They're going to lean into that rushing attack, especially being I believe this is in Seattle. Yeah, being in that road environment. So yeah, I just think this would be a week where Ferguson's not going to hit those ceiling games, a ceiling game that we've seen from him throughout the year. Now, another tight end you might be considering streaming, especially with all these teams on a bye this week. I would definitely consider avoiding this name, but it's going to be Cade Otton against the Panthers. Panthers only allowing 6.2 points per game. That is the 10th fewest allowed in the NFL. No tight end has finished over 50 receiving yards against the Panthers defense in their last 4 games. Now, they have allowed one tight end to score a touchdown in the last 4 games. So it definitely feels like if you stream Cade Otton, he's going to be a touchdown dependent tight end play this week. And I've said this about before, when last week I said sit DeAndre Hopkins and what he finished with, I think 52 yards. And it's not because their defense is great. It's just because teams can run the ball against the Panthers defense, and they're usually not only successful running the ball, they're usually up like 2 or 3 touchdowns on them, so they don't have to pass. So that just takes away the potential fantasy value for you, and the game gets scripted out your player's way. So yeah, I would definitely not consider streaming Cade Otton in week 13. So yeah, that is my top starts and sits for week 13. If there's any players I did not speak about today in this video, you can always get in the comments, DM, text me, and I always try to get back to people as soon as I can. As always, hit the like button, subscribe, follow me on all my social media platforms. You guys know the drill. You'll get me back again here next Tuesday night for my top waiver wire targets and streamable defenses. So I'll see you guys then. Hope you guys win your matchup, lock up a playoff spot this weekend. Peace out.